right, our final study in Hebrews. I don't think we're going to make it all the way through. If the past is any indication, we're going to manage to do about 2 chapters, which will leave 2 chapters left undone. But that's okay, because after doing 11 chapters together, my hope is that will give you both enough grounding and some impetus, some interest in finishing the last 2 chapters on your own. So before we dig back in, starting at Hebrews chapter 10, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you this evening and those who are gathered here. We thank you for the food which has been prepared on our behalf. And we thank you for the opportunity to conclude our time of study together. We give you humble thanks for the weeks that we have spent, for what we have learned, for what we have seen and heard, for how you have challenged us and shaped us, and how you have even more opened us up to your truth and your word. And this evening as we conclude, we pray that you plant good seed within the good soil of our hearts. That what we have learned tonight and over this Lenten season may be watered and nurtured by your Spirit and bear good fruit in our lives and in our parish. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay. I'm going to start off with Hebrews 10. We're going to do the first 7 verses. And I will get us started. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. If it could, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshippers would have been cleansed once for all, and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins, because it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, Here I am. It is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, O God." All right, what are we seeing in this very first section?
Well,
if we look back and recall how 8 and 9 kind of flowed together, we started making those comparisons again. It's a book full of comparisons. But we were talking about the earthly tabernacle versus the heavenly tabernacle. And the earthly tabernacle, the one built by Moses, it was a real thing, right? I mean, it was tangible, it was solid, it was made of real stuff. Mm-hmm. And yet, the author of this letter calls it a shadow and calls it a copy. Now, why was the earthly tabernacle a shadow and a copy? Remember what we went into last week?
well, first of all, because it's not eternal, like the original. It's just basically assimilating what the original is.
Right. Now, a tabernacle made of wood and gold and cloth. What will happen to that wood after hundreds of years? It's going to be gone. Or cloth or gold or any of this sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Moses himself does not create this on the fly, but he is given a vision of something that he is supposed to then copy and build. Mm-hmm. And that is a heavenly tabernacle within the mind of God, within the presence of God, a heavenly place where God's presence dwells. Mm-hmm. And so, what we think of as real, the wood and the metal and the cloth, were almost symbols, almost metaphors of something that we can't really see and touch and taste and feel, but were truly real and eternal and lasting. Well, now we moved into a different kind of shadow and copy. These first few verses, what's the shadow and copy now?
Well, basically it's talking about that sacrifices, and how, what I'm getting is how they're sacrifices, but they're not really sacrifices. They're more, there's more physical part of it than the spiritual part of it.
Okay. How does verse 1 start off? What is a shadow and copy in verse 1? Carol.
It's just the law has but a shadow of good things to come.
The law. The law now is being called a shadow. Now we're kind of getting into something here. It must have been a pretty big deal to call the tabernacle a copy or a shadow. There may be few things more precious in the memory of the Jews than the tabernacle. And nothing more precious in their current history, when this letter is written, than the Temple of Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies. And yet, the author here is calling them copies and shadows. And so that's got to be a pretty big deal. Like, whoa, wait a second. But now he's getting serious. He's even saying that the law is a copy and a shadow. The law, which is what has marked and set apart Israel as being God's chosen people. It is the giving of the law that makes Israel the chosen ones. That is the sign of the covenant. That's what makes them different than the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Egyptians, is that God has entrusted to them His law. We call it the Mosaic law because it comes from Moses, but don't be misled. It's God's law. So these 10 commandments and all the law that flows from it, He calls a shadow or a copy. Now that's a pretty big deal. But he doesn't just drop the bomb, he starts supporting that argument. These next two verses, how is he starting to support the argument that the law itself is not what is eternal and lasting?
Well, first is talking, the other part of that is like a preview of what is to come. It's not the real thing. It's just a preview of what is going to be real. Then it goes into the sacrifices that are done year after year, but they never really provide any cleansing. So it is just positioning where the law was.
Now he's making a little logical argument there. How is he demonstrating that these sacrifices are not really cleansing the sin?
The sacrifices would have stopped.
That's right. Because you keep doing them every year, and you keep doing them throughout the year. Not just, Yom Kippur, as we talked about last week, is the Day of Atonement, and that's the big one, where the sins are atoned for the year. But remember, there was an entire sacrificial system that was happening throughout the year on a much smaller individual scale. But what the argument is if these things were really effective, you would just do it once, right?
Yeah, because they would have been purified the one time, and that's it.
And yet every year,
They have to.
we have to do it again. And I think there's a little highlight that's taken here where human sin cannot be covered by the blood of what? Bulls and goats. Now we all know it's bulls and goats because it's Yom Kippur, he's talking to Hebrews who know this. But isn't it interesting that he actually kind of overtly says that? Kind of to make you think about it. Like, we all know the blood is a big deal, but what does a bull or a goat have to do with you, a man or a woman? Human sin shouldn't it require something more than the sacrifice of just an animal?
Well, I think that at that point, people thought that the sin was transmittable to a goat or a bull, and therefore sacrificing them meant that that sin would go away. But it purifies them, but it really...
And yet every year they wound up doing it again. Can you think of an occasion maybe in your own life where you knew you had done wrong? You'd hurt somebody. I mean, it's something you said or something you did or didn't do. And you just felt really bad about it. And you wanted to make things right. And so you go and you apologize. And they say something along the lines of, well, don't worry about it. You ever had a situation like that where you just felt even worse? They said, don't worry about it, but you still felt like you were carrying something. Like, yell at me or hit me or something, I feel really bad. And you're just telling me, it's okay. It was not okay. I want to make this better. You ever felt that where whatever's been done is such a big deal, you want the other person to feel that it's a big a deal as you do, right? And when they kind of let you off easy, you almost feel like there's something undone. There's something that needs to be finished or completed.
Well, you feel like that it's not a real feeling of forgiveness. And they may have forgiven you, but unless you forgive yourself, you're still going to carry the hurt.
Now, perhaps this is not a temptation that you've ever experienced, but maybe it's happened to you or you have heard about such things, or you can at least imagine such things. Could you imagine someone who was hurt by this other person? The other person, I'm really, really sorry, and the person who had been hurt either said, no big deal, don't worry about it, but they knew that was going to bother the person who hurt them. They purposely did not make a big deal about forgiving them because they wanted them to carry a burden. They wanted them to feel unsettled. They wanted them to kind of twist in the wind for a little bit. You ever seen anything like that happen?
It's a bit vindictive.
It is vindictive. It really is. However, you ever met a vindictive person? Maybe one or two? Now, clearly, none of us have ever had a vindictive thought. Ever. Even for a moment. But we could probably imagine somebody who was terrible enough to do that. So at some level, I think we get this sense of the weightiness of sin. And what the author is doing here, isn't he kind of saying, you feel it. At some level, you feel it and you know this is a big deal. If it's that big of a deal, how is the blood of a bull going to make things right? You know it's a big deal because you keep doing this every year. And every year you feel like you need to do it again because you know you have failed and you've flopped and you've sinned. But then we move into verse 5. The law, a shadow or copy, is pointing to something. The tabernacle, the earthly tabernacle, is pointing to a heavenly one. It was real in the sense it was made of real stuff, but it wasn't pointing to itself, it was pointing beyond. In the East, you've seen icons before. I've used them in a variety of ways. We have an icon of St. Stephen in the narthex of the church building. And you know, they're real stylized and stuff. And they've got kind of their own kind of somewhat odd artistic representations, right? An icon is not intended to have devotion given to it, even though icons in the East are used for purposes of devotion. Icons are understood, have you heard this before, as windows. They are intended to be windows that you look through into heaven.
Just simply the Catholic Church uses icons for devotion purposes.
Yeah, and you are not offering adoration to a picture. Just like when you look through that window, you're not looking at the glass. But the glass is allowing you to see through it into what's behind it. An icon, a window into heaven, is intended for you to look into it and through it into that which is real. That heavenly, true thing. The law in that sense is an icon. It's real enough, just like a picture is real, you can touch it. Just like the earthly tabernacle was real, it was made of wood and metal and cloth. And yet, it was like a window that you could look through into that which was behind it, which was truly real and eternal and solid in a way that mere wood and metal and cloth are not. The law, in this sense, is pointing to something. The author is saying to someone. Who does it point to?
Pointing to Christ.
Pointing to Christ. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then he said, Here I am. It is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, O God. Let's read on. Gus, would you do 8 through 14, please?
First he said, sacrifices and offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not desire, nor were you pleased with them, although the law required them to be made. Then he said, Here I am, I have come to do your will. He sets aside the first to establish the second, and by that will we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never be taken away, which can never take away sins. But when the priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sin, he sat down at the right hand of God. Since that time he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool, because by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy.
Very good. All right, so the law is pointing to something. The sacrifice of the bulls and the goats are pointing to something that is bigger and better and more real. What are they pointing to?
Well, they're pointing to Jesus Christ.
And what about
the sacrifice of his body?
So these, remember he says in 8, these sacrifices were, he acknowledges that. You know, you're not making something up. God wanted you to make these animal sacrifices. But they weren't about the animal sacrifices so much as they were about pointing you to something else. And that something else is really someone else. And it's a different kind of sacrifice that doesn't need to be made year after year after year.
It was made once for all time.
He sets aside the first to establish the second. That's verse 9. What do you think that intends?
We can have two. You can't have the first law along with Christ.
Well, he's establishing also the importance of the second, which is the sacrifice of the body of Christ.
Yeah, now think about this.
This is like,
If Christ sacrifices his body, which is good once for all, How many more bulls and goats do you need to sacrifice after that?
Shouldn't be any.
Yeah. They were pointing towards something. They were getting you ready for something, and it's here. So, do you still keep doing them? They're done.
Shouldn't, yeah.
They have fulfilled their purpose. It's not that they were bad. It's not that they're wrong. They have fulfilled their purpose because now that sacrifice has been made complete. Remember, first he said, how in the world can the blood of an animal cover over sins? He doesn't use the same terms here. It just is sort of a matter of fact that the blood of Christ covers over those sins. Why do you think he's so matter of fact about that?
Well, he's just establishing that once Christ sacrificed his body, that really takes over any other sacrifices that
Well, it's
can be done.
written in the Holy Book. It's been established by God.
And if we're talking about human sin, but the blood of an animal is insufficient, what kind of blood is sufficient?
The blood of Christ, which is a lot more important than the one from the animal.
But it's certainly no less important than ours. It's human blood, but it's perfect human blood. Remember that? Spotless, and what we said before, especially in verse 9. That perfect sacrifice. There's a little kind of twist of words here that I think is kind of neat. Look and see if you see what I see. Verse 11 and 12. There is a comparison being made, as has been several times, between the human high priest and Christ, our great high priest. This time, it's in action. Not just we've talked about their power and their differences and their effectiveness, but there's just this neat little turn of a phrase about their action. And it seems very simple, but I think it actually communicates something profound. Do you see what I see?
I'm seeing the change between relating what priests do again and again as compared to what God or Christ, which would be this priest, offered for all time one sacrifice
Yes.
of sin. So
Yes. And I think it's underscored. I mean, that's the main point, but I think that point is underscored by this. I think it's just kind of a neat little image here. What does 11 say the priest is doing day after day?
he offers the same sacrifices.
Simpler than that.
That has never...
Simpler. Physically, what is the priest doing every day?
Stands.
Standing. Because the sacrifice has to be done all the time. You know, when you're standing all the time, that means you've got work to do. And you can't take a break, you've got to stand because there's just so much to do, and the priest has to keep on and keep on and keep on because the animal sacrifice system just keeps going and going and going and going. Jesus makes this one sacrifice, what does he do?
He sits.
He sits. He sits. He sits at the right hand of God. But isn't that kind of neat? The priest is standing because he's a busy little beaver because he can't stop. Jesus, he makes this sacrifice and it's done. It is finished. We will hear on Good Friday. And then what does he do? He sits. Do busy people sit? Do people who are frantically trying to keep up with things that the workload just never stops, do they sit?
No.
Or do people who have completed their job sit? And it's just kind of, it's a small thing, but I just saw a neat little turn of a phrase that underscores the human priest has to keep doing and doing and doing. And Jesus accomplishes, and it is finished, and he sits.
Well, it's showing also, and not to take away from the priest that is doing good, perfection.
Yes.
And so he doesn't have to do it.
That's what the priest is not denigrated here.
No.
It is right that they stand and they do their work, but now because of Christ, they don't have to because he has finished the job that they frankly couldn't finish, so they had to keep working. Very good, very good. Okay, I'm going to go all the way down to 25 now. So this is going to be 15 through 25. The Holy Spirit also testifies to us about this. First, he says, "This is the covenant I will make with them. After that time, says the Lord, I will put my laws in their hearts and I will write them on their minds." Then he adds, "Their sins and lawless acts I will remember no more. And where these have been forgiven, there is no longer any sacrifice for sin. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, open for us through the curtain, that is his body, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." Now, this first section, the kind of 15 through 18, I think is covering ground we've already covered. This is both quoting from Jeremiah, as we did earlier on in Hebrews, and I think it's just kind of repeating these themes that we've already been discussing this evening about the fullness and the completion of Christ's sacrifice. But we start off in verse 19, and the very first word is what? Therefore! Big circle around the therefore because he's going to make a point. He's summarizing something. What is he summarizing? What is the therefore? What is the conclusion of what we've just been talking about according to these next few verses?
Well, that we feel confident or more assured to enter the most holy place because of the blood of Jesus.
Okay. Now, let's back up for just a bit. I think it was either last week or the week before where we talked more about the nature of the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies and the mercy seat and the activities of Yom Kippur, and you sacrifice the bull, the priest did for himself and his family, and then the goats for the people, and he was sprinkling their blood on the horns of the altar and the mercy seat and all this sort of stuff. All right, so we've now been given this rundown of what has happened in the eternal tabernacle, and it's being compared or described in ways that the people would identify with the earthly tabernacle. What are some key words or phrases here that sound exactly like what's happening in Yom Kippur?
The curtain is being opened.
The curtain. Now, what does the curtain do?
It goes from, it separates and goes into the holy.
Yes, the Holy of Holies is separated by a big, thick, heavy curtain, which goes about yay high. It's floor to ceiling. It covers it over fully and completely. Who gets to go into the Holy of Holies through that curtain?
The high priest.
The high priest only. How often does it do this? Once a year. Once a year. Remember we talked about you're supposed to tie a rope around him with bells on, and he crawls in there, and if he dies because being in the presence of God is just too awesome, then the bells stop ringing and you know to pull out the dead body. It's that big of a deal. Right? So you, oh non-priest, oh non-Levite, oh non-Jew, would have never, ever, ever, never, ever gone through that curtain. No chance. He came from the wrong family. But now, who is going through the curtain? Who is allowed now to enter into the presence of God?
Christ has opened it for us.
Yeah.
It's for us now. Okay, a little thinking back here. We're going to be visiting this over the next few days as we enter the Triduum, the 3 most holy days. At the crucifixion, all of these incredible things happen. The sky is darkened and the rocks split and there's earthquakes. And something happens in the Temple of Jerusalem. What happens? The curtain is torn, like a little snag in a rip. It is torn and left open. That which is always closed, which is always covered, it is at his death that the presence of God is now open. And how might we then, who before would have no right and no opportunity to go through that curtain, how are we supposed to approach the presence of God? Through Christ. And what is our state of mind and our state of being?
Confident.
Confidence. Because we're so awesome?
Because we have Christ to intercede for us, and He's there for us.
His blood has done it and not ours. And so that we may draw near. This one is saying 22, with a sincere heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. 22, sprinkled and washed. Does that sound familiar? Now, it should sound familiar in a way for us as Christians, but it should sound familiar to Jews in a different way, or in what we've spoken about earlier in the book in a different way. What's the way that we as Christians hear sprinkled and cleansed? Baptism. Washed and made new inside and out. Based off of what has been talked about before in this same book, though, what is sprinkling and cleansed probably pointing to? You remember what gets sprinkled?
Well, didn't the priest sprinkle with blood?
That's it. The priest has to first wash himself, a ritual bath to be clean. And then the priest makes the sacrifice, and then that blood is sprinkled. It's sprinkled within the Holy of Holies on the mercy seat, the horns of the altar. Now, what is being sprinkled?
Blood, Christ's blood.
Christ's blood. And where is it being sprinkled? 22, it's no longer on the mercy seat being sprinkled. Christ's blood is being sprinkled in a different location altogether. Verse 22.
On our hearts.
On our hearts. Yeah. It's going to wash us and it's going to make us new. But there's something interesting about this. Okay, in Yom Kippur, what was being sprinkled again? What was the physical object being sprinkled? That blood is being sprinkled on what? It was being sprinkled on the mercy seat. Okay. What does the mercy seat represent?
It represents where God sits.
It represents where God sits. Okay. The presence of God dwells there. It sits there on like a throne. Now the blood of Christ is being sprinkled on our hearts. What does that say about our hearts? But maybe that's where God ought to sit. And perhaps our hearts now ought to be His throne.
And it establishes more a close connection to God, not as much of a separation as before, where that's not obtainable. You know, you can obtain.
Yeah, somebody doing it on your behalf.
Yeah.
You never even see it, you're just told it was done. Okay, now, but then 23 through 25 kind of swerve a little bit. What's happening in 23 and 25? We've had these incredibly profound and deep theological issues talked about. And then 23, 24, and 25 suddenly kind of switch gears real quick.
Well, it's focusing on us, helping each other, you know, not neglecting to meeting together, to worship together, to be. So it's no longer just God in us, but it's God us and amongst us.
Okay?
And we encourage one another and until the day he returns.
And I think it's interesting that 23 is what is this first verse that immediately follows these very profound, you know, kind of deeply theological truths where let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. That what has just been talked about, God's new mercy seat being in our hearts, and his presence, and being sprinkled with the blood of Christ, and going into the presence of God through the curtain that Christ opened in his body, and on and on and on. And it's kind of coming down to a practicality of what this ought to mean in your life. So hang on to this. It's precious. It is powerful. Hang on to it, because he who promised is faithful. Who makes the promise? God makes the
God
promise.
makes the promise, so
God makes the promise. And does God keep his promises?
yes,
You better
so we
believe
can
it.
trust on him
Yes.
keeping the promise.
And then 24, now that we are kind of reaffirmed in our faith, 24 says basically what you did. So therefore kind of keep with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Spur each other on. Remember, boy, it's been chapters ago. They're about encouraging one another as long as it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of how we need each other. Because life is tough and it's hard, and sometimes we want to quit or give up or we're just feeling weak. And we require each other to encourage one another, to help one another, to spur one another on. And 25 is kind of a classic, therefore go to church on Sunday verse. Those of you who want to worship God out on the golf course tend to get Hebrews 10:25 quoted to them. Why might some be in the habit of not meeting together?
I would see it as selfishness, not wanting to give up their time for anything.
And it's easier, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Sleep in or do something else, or I mean, can you think of things you could do on a Sunday morning? I can. However, if we have this bad habit, we miss out on encouraging one another. And this will become only more important as the return of Christ comes closer. Is the return of Christ closer? Closer than it was yesterday.
It could be today, you know.
Tomorrow be one more day closer. So every day it becomes a little more important. The metaphor that I was given for this years ago that always kind of struck me is charcoal briquettes. you ever made it like in a grill where you use the actual coal. I mean, I've used gas now for years, but every now and again I'll pull out, like in a park or something, the charcoal briquettes. And how do you put them in the grill if you're going to use charcoal? You make a pile out of them. And so you light them, and that's eventually all the coals get hot. What happens to the one coal that kind of rolls over to the corner? It burns out and goes cold. But the ones that are all together stay hot far longer because they are sharing each other's heat. And we as Christians, if we get knocked loose and go off in the corner by ourselves, the fire can go out. It is when we are together that heat might be preserved. Do not neglect the fellowship that some are in the habit of doing, but encourage one another. You can't do that if you're not there. All right. Would you read, please, 26 through 34?
If we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for his sins is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think a man deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sacrificed him, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," and again, "The Lord will judge his people." It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions.
Okay. Now, a similar passage got us down a rabbit hole a few weeks ago, where we started talking about apostasy. What happens with those who have been Christians and who turn their back on their faith? And that, we started talking about, what that might mean, and, boy, those words sound real hard, and what is it saying? You can't turn back. And we even had another interpretation that was saying, well, it doesn't really mean quite that, and so we're kind of going on and on about that. Now we're getting to a section that to me sounds awfully familiar. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and the raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. How much more severely do you think a man deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified him, who has insulted the Spirit of grace? So suddenly we're back to those kind of hard words. And what is the gist of these hard words? Pardon?
It's a warning.
It's a warning. Now what's the warning?
You better walk straight and narrow or else.
Yeah, walk straight and narrow or else. Don't turn your back on the Lord. I mean, this is, to me, I think awfully analogous to what we discussed a few weeks ago. This is, I think, talking about, now, deliberately keep on sinning after we receive the knowledge of truth. I mean, do we sin even for Christians? Do we sin ever? Yes, we'll continue to fall short. This is this great paradox Martin Luther referred to as simul justus et peccator, that we are at the same time justified while we remain sinners. That this perfection in Christ has not happened yet. Salvation is not experienced in its fullness yet. Christ might have sprinkled his blood on our hearts and God sits upon that throne, yet have we seen the heavenly tabernacle face to face? Not yet. We're kind of working towards it. All right? So we're not, it's coming. It's going to happen. We're just not there yet. So, I want to argue that 26 and some of these other verses following is more like the warning against apostasy that we heard before. It's not so much, you call yourself a Christian and I saw you take that other cookie and slip it into your purse. You know, you are cast into the lake of fire hell. I think this is talking again about apostasy. This deliberate, and he is arguing here, irrevocable rejection of Christ after you have accepted him. Now, under the old sacrificial system, there was this kind of a good news, bad news thing. We've already talked about the bad news. That how long does that atonement last under the old sacrificial system?
It lasts as long as it takes for another two.
Yeah, certainly no longer than a year. Maybe even less. But every year you had to do it again. So that's the bad news. But can you think of that same thing as good news? Or at least interesting news?
Well, it doesn't give it gives an excuse to the sin again, because you know that
next year I'm going to get the tongue again. So I mean, yeah, I kind of screwed up, but at least I got that thing coming up next year. We'll cover it over there. You know, there's kind of like this get out of jail free card maybe that, you know, well, yeah, it's not good that every year we have to do this, but every year we get to do this. You know, you get this sense of, well, if I screw up really, really bad, all I have to do is just make it long enough to get back to Yom Kippur and I'll be covered. So he's saying, like, you don't get this every year again. You've got to get your head away from this thinking that when you screw up and when you sin, well, don't worry about it because, you know, Yom Kippur is coming in a few more months and I'll be all right. That if the sacrifice is once and for all, that's good news. You don't have to do it over and over again. But if the sacrifice is once and for all, then you need to not treat it as something temporary, as something that you can, you know, go and put one more Band-Aid on whenever you need it. This is not a pill that you take whenever you feel like it, but Christ's sacrifice once and for all to be received and to be lived from there on out. Only a fearful expectation of judgment and raging fire will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think a man deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot? Note a little bit of protection here about rejecting the law of Moses. The people who died without mercy are those who died without mercy, according to this, as far as the law was concerned. Those who had never heard the law? No. Those who didn't understand the law? No. But those who, with the testimony of witnesses, rejected the law. Not even those who failed to live up to it, those who rejected it. Those who said, screw you. And I got the people who watch me do it. So, we've got the how much more severely do you think a man deserves to be punished who is trampling on the Son of God underfoot. Let me at least make the suggestion that the term that is being discussed here is about rejection. Not about failure to live up to a standard, but out and out rejection. And that's just kind of a different thing. Now, does a failure to live up to the standard have consequences? Very well could be, but I don't think that passage is dealing with that. What this passage, I believe, is dealing with is this rejection. So, you reject Christ after you've received him, then you're in for a world of hurt. How much more? You knew how bad it was to reject the law of Moses when you had witnesses. How much more? When you're rejecting not the thing that's a shadow pointing to something real, but when you reject that real thing. And then we get these quotes, and God will avenge, and I will repay, and judge, and dreadful, and I mean, these Old Testament quotes here. Old Testament quotes. Now, let me make a suggestion here that what we read in 26 through 31 is very purposely put together with 32 through 34. There's a reason that those two are back to back. Now, Carol, you called 26 through 31 a warning. Do you warn people that you don't care about? Do you warn people that you are disinterested in, or that you couldn't care less if they succeed or fail, if they live or die? You warn people that you want to see make it, right? So, though 26 through 31 are hard, remember they're back to back to 32 through 34. What's happening in 32 through 34?
Well, it's placing you to remember a situation where you were, you were ridiculed, you were, after you received, God, that you stood your ground and you face anything that was against
Yeah.
you. So it's
You were so faithful.
Now, on the warning is talking about what ifs, right? These are conditional things that have not happened, saying, if you do such and such, then this will happen. 32 through 34, this is not a what if. What is this? Isn't he saying, remember what you did? You've already done this. Look at what you've been through. Look at how hard it was, and you made it. You persevered. Look at all the hard stuff you have already managed to make it through. I can't help but get a movie line in my head right now. James Cameron's The Abyss. And it's like this, this crew on a sub, and they're down way deep in the ocean, and they meet like this weird alien made of water or something like that. But anyway, one of the crew members drowns, and it's like the love interest of the main guy, and he's able to pull her out of the water, and she's drowned, she's full of water, and he's pounding on her chest, and you've never given up on anything in your life. Breathe! And it's just, it's supposed to be this big dramatic moment, and she comes back to life. But he's basically saying, you've been a fighter about everything. This is not the first tough scrape you found yourself in. You've gotten through. Don't let this one get you. You've shown that you're tough. You've shown that you can make it. You've shown that you can persevere. You've never given up on anything in your life. Breathe. that's kind of how I see this. He's saying, stuff might get hard, and you might want to just throw up your hands and quit. But when you do, remember how much other stuff you've already had to go through. I want to suggest, kind of like what C.S. Lewis said, that few people are argued out of their faith. Few people get in some kind of debate and they just, oh, you're right, I never thought about that. There must be no God. Or, you're right, Jesus is it's a fraud. But people who lose their faith, don't they tend to just kind of drift away? Kind of like that coal that gets away from the rest of the fire. They just sort of cool off.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've been through so much. Don't quit. Don't give up now. Stuff is going to be hard, and you're going to be encouraged to just you're going to be encouraged to stop coming to church, as some are in the habit of doing, or to just give up because there's too many people telling you that you're wrong, or that you betrayed them, or you betrayed your faith as a Jew, or whatever it is. But look at how many things you've already been through, and you've made it. The Lord has brought you through. Line of amazing grace. The Lord has brought me safe thus far, and He will lead me home. So don't give up and don't quit now. You've never given up anything in your life. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally relate to this part. So.
We've all had those moments, right?
Yeah. It's just.
Even when stuff feels kind of crummy and hard, how many times has that happened? We tend to forget about it. And it takes a little reminder. Hey, remember that time 3 years ago, and you thought you were at the end of your road, and look what the Lord did. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically, giving you encouragement for what, by showing you or letting you see what you've been through, as compared to the verses 26 to 31, where it's talking about more of a strict rule,
Do you need me? Okay.
Oh, jeez.
All right. Thank you. So, let's just finish this off.
Okay.
Would you read 35 for the end, please?
Sure. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. For in just a very little while, He who is coming will come and will not delay. But a righteous one will lead by faith, and if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved.
So after all of those warnings, after all of those dire predictions of what happens when we turn away, how does this conclude in verse 39?
It just encourages you to keep persevering, and that if you do so, the good stuff will happen.
Yeah. Because you know what? The people who fall away, that's not you. I know you. That's not you. Some people will do this. Some people will be the charcoal that falls to the side and cools off. Some people will do the rejection. They'll be apostate. They will let stuff get to them. They'll follow whatever. That's not you. I know you. And that's not you. Me and you, we are of those who believe, and we shall be saved. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. That is how chapter 11 begins, and that is how our study will conclude. It is that faith in Christ, our great high priest, who has made the sacrifice once and for all. He was greater than the angels, greater than Moses, greater than the law, that all these things point to. He who is what is truly real and lasting and eternal. And he has sprinkled his own blood and made a throne, not just on a mercy seat, but a throne of our very hearts, so that God may dwell finally, not just amongst his people, but within his people. That's you and me, that's us, we who believe and who are saved.